Nobody expected this. A 21-year-old from Quezon City walked into Toronto and did something that should have been impossible on paper, because the woman standing across the net from her holds a share of the fastest serve ever recorded in the history of women's tennis. And somehow it didn't matter, not even a little bit, because in just over an hour, Alex turned one of the most feared weapons in the sport into a punchline. And by the time the last point landed, the entire stadium understood they hadn't just watched a routine second-round match. They had watched the opening chapter of something much bigger, something that could end with a payday large enough to reshape the landscape of Philippine sports forever. And if you think that sounds like an exaggeration, stick around, because the numbers alone will make your jaw drop. Let's rewind for a second and set the scene properly, because context is everything here. Back in January, at the Australian Open, Alex ran into a buzzsaw named Alycia Parks, a towering American who shares the record for the fastest serve ever clocked on the WTA Tour, a rocket that once touched 129 miles per hour at the US Open. And that day in Melbourne, Alex actually raced out to a dominant first-set lead before completely unraveling, watching Parks storm back to steal the match in 3 sets. It was the kind of loss that lingers, the kind that gets replayed in your head at 2 a.m., the kind that either breaks a player or forges them into someone tougher. For Alex, it was clearly the second one. Fast forward 7 months, different country, different stakes, same opponent, and this time Alex didn't just compete with Parks, she dismantled her, breezing through in straight sets, 6-3, 6-4, wrapping the entire contest in barely more than an hour. And the way she did it is honestly the most fascinating part of this whole story. Instead of trying to out-hit a woman built like a heavyweight boxer with a serve that behaves like a heat-seeking missile, Alex did the opposite of what everyone expected. She camped inside the baseline on return, took the ball absurdly early, and refused to let Parks settle into any kind of rhythm whatsoever. Every single time that first serve missed its mark, Alex pounced. And the stat that tells the whole story is almost hard to believe. She won north of 63% of the points played on Parks' second serve, which for a player whose entire game is built around overwhelming you with pace off the first ball, is basically a nightmare scenario. She broke that legendary serve not once, but twice in the opening set alone, and the crowd, which by the way was overwhelmingly filled with Filipino fans who had turned an ordinary hard court match into something resembling a home game, erupted every single time. This wasn't just a win, it was a statement, a very public, very loud declaration that the version of Alex, who lost in Melbourne back in January, no longer exists. When reporters caught up with her afterward, she kept things refreshingly grounded, admitting in her own words that she simply feels like a completely different competitor now compared to where she was standing at the start of the year. And honestly, look at the results. The evidence speaks for itself far louder than any quote ever could. This victory pushed her winning streak to 6 matches in a row. And if you're keeping track of the bigger picture, it also marked her 8th win of the season against a top 10 ranked opponent, which is the kind of number that turns heads in locker rooms across the entire tour. Players who used to see her name in the draw and feel relieved are now feeling something closer to dread. And here's where the story gets even juicier, because this run through Toronto isn't happening in isolation. It's happening at the biggest non-Grand Slam event on the calendar outside the 4 majors, a tournament with a total prize pool sitting at a jaw-dropping $7.43 million. That is not a typo. Compare that to the event she just came from in Washington, D.C., where she captured her very first career title, and you start to understand exactly why this Toronto run feels different, feels heavier, feels like it actually matters on a scale that transcends tennis rankings. The champion in Toronto last year walked away with roughly $752,000, a number that had already jumped by nearly 44% compared to the year before that, which tells you everything about how fast this tournament's prestige and payout have been climbing. For a player like Alex, who entered this event having earned just under $100,000 for the entire season before her breakthrough title run in D.C. added another $252,000 to her total. A deep run here in Canada could realistically push her past the $2 million mark in career prize money. $2 million. For a 21-year-old who was ranked outside the top 100 not that long ago. Let that sink in for a moment. But money was never really the headline here, was it? The real prize, the thing that actually moves the needle for a career, is ranking points. And this is where things get spicy, because Toronto hands out a full 1,000 points to whoever lifts the trophy, exactly double what Washington offered. Alex arrived in Canada seeded 25th, freshly minted at a career-high ranking of number 20 in the world after her title run, sitting on 2,106 points. And she now finds herself positioned in the top half of a draw that suddenly looks a lot more open than anyone anticipated. Of course, nothing in professional tennis comes free, and the path forward is lined with landmines. Sitting in the lower half of that same draw is a name that should send a small chill down the spine of anyone rooting for Alex, the reigning Wimbledon champion, a Czech phenom who has already beaten her twice this season, and not in close, forgettable ways either. In their most recent meeting, a semi-final clash in Berlin, the Czech star won an eye-watering 83% of her first serve points and finished the match with 33 clean winners against only 15 unforced errors. Numbers that scream complete and total control from start to finish. That's the kind of statistical beatdown that would make most players dread a rematch. But here's the thing about Alex that keeps coming up over and over in every single interview, every press conference, every quiet moment after a big win. She doesn't seem interested in dwelling on past defeats. She seems almost allergic to fear. When asked directly about constantly checking her ranking or getting caught up in the hype building around her, she brushed it off with a kind of calm confidence you don't often see in someone this early in a breakout run, essentially saying that her focus stays locked on winning matches and playing at the level required to keep winning them, rather than obsessing over numbers on a leaderboard. That mentality, that refusal to get rattled by pressure or history, might be exactly what separates a player who has won great tournament from a player who builds an actual legacy. And make no mistake, the resume backing up that confidence has gotten seriously impressive in a short amount of time. Since that painful Berlin loss to the Czech star, Alex has gone on to capture her first ever tour-level title, climbed all the way to a new career-high ranking, and along the way managed to defeat 5 different players who either currently hold or have previously held Grand Slam titles, all within a stretch of tournaments that most players would consider a career-defining stretch on its own. Her overall record against top 10 opponents this season now sits at 9 wins against just 4 losses, a ratio that most seasoned veterans would kill for, let alone a 21-year-old still finding her footing on the biggest stages in the sport. So when people ask whether the Alex who lost to the Czech champion in Berlin is the same Alex who might face her again in Toronto, the honest answer is no, not even close, and that should genuinely worry whoever ends up on the other side of the net. There's also something deeply human running underneath all of these statistics and prize money figures, something that explains why this particular run has captured so much attention beyond the usual tennis crowd. The support she's receiving in Toronto isn't ordinary tournament support. It's closer to a homecoming, fueled by a Filipino community in the greater Toronto area that numbers well over 250,000 strong, and tickets for her matches have reportedly sold out entirely, transforming what should be just another WTA fixture into something closer to a cultural event. She's openly embraced that energy too, talking about how meaningful it feels watching an entire community show up in force, hopeful that moments like these help grow the sport of tennis in a country where it hasn't always occupied center stage. There's a certain symbolism baked into all of this that's hard to ignore. The idea of a young athlete simultaneously chasing personal glory and carrying the weight of representation, doing both without seeming to buckle under the pressure of either one. Even the small, quirky details people have noticed about her, the ruffled socks, the light-up shoes, the little personal touches that make her stand out visually on court, have started to feel less like fashion statements and more like symbols of someone who refuses to blend in, who wants to be seen exactly as she is while she rewrites what's possible for players from her country. Going back to the tennis itself for a moment, because that's ultimately what got us here, the tactical breakdown of how she handled that legendary serve deserves a little more attention, because it wasn't luck, it was preparation meeting opportunity. The American she faced stands well over 6 feet tall and built her entire game around raw first strike power. The kind of game that thrives when opponents sit back and simply try to survive the pace. Alex, standing noticeably shorter and playing as a left-hander, took the complete opposite approach, relying on footwork, angles, and relentless consistency to physically deny her opponent any rhythm whatsoever. It's a classic clash of styles, brute force against precision and patience. And, on this particular night, precision won convincingly. Every missed first serve became an opportunity. Every short ball got punished. Every attempt to blast her way out of trouble got redirected right back with interest. By the time the match reached its final stages, you could see the frustration creeping into her opponent's body language. The realization dawning that the weapon she had relied on for years simply wasn't going to save her this time. And really, that's the story of Alex's entire 2025 season in miniature. Opponents walking in expecting one version of her and running into someone entirely different. Someone who has clearly put in the work behind the scenes to fix the exact weaknesses that used to cost her matches earlier in her career. The transition from Washington to Toronto also deserves mention, because professional tennis rarely gives players the luxury of rest and jumping between tournaments back-to-back. Sometimes with barely a day to recover and adjust, takes a physical and mental toll that fans watching from home don't always appreciate. Alex has spoken candidly about learning how to manage that whirlwind, about slowly adapting to the demands of back-to-back deep tournament runs, admitting that her mind kept drifting between celebrating the win she just had and immediately shifting focus toward the next challenge waiting on the schedule. That kind of honesty, that willingness to admit the process is still evolving rather than pretending everything comes easily, is part of what makes her story resonate with people beyond hardcore tennis fans. It's not a fairy tale where everything just clicks perfectly. It's a grind, filled with adjustments and lessons learned the hard way. And that authenticity is exactly what turns a good athlete into someone people genuinely want to root for. So where does this all leave us? A 21-year-old former underdog now sits one win away from a potential clash against the reigning Wimbledon champion, a player who has beaten her twice already this season and who enters any rematch as one of the most dangerous competitors on tour. But the version of Alex walking into that potential showdown looks nothing like the player who lost those previous meetings. She's riding a 6-match winning streak. She just neutralized the most feared serve in the sport on one of the biggest stages available to her. She's carrying the momentum of a maiden title, a career high ranking, and a growing list of marquee scalps that includes multiple Grand Slam champions. And she's doing all of it while an entire community, and honestly an entire country, watches every single point with their hearts in their throats, hoping this is the tournament where everything finally comes together on the largest stage she's faced yet. Whether she ultimately lifts that trophy and claims a life-changing chunk of that $7.43 million prize pool remains to be seen. Tennis has a cruel habit of humbling even the hottest players at the worst possible moment. But regardless of how the next match unfolds, one thing already feels certain: this is no longer a story about potential or promise. This is a story about a player who has arrived, fully formed, dangerous, fearless, and impossible to ignore. And if you needed a single moment to mark the exact turning point where casual tennis fans everywhere started paying very close attention, it was this one. A sold-out crowd in Toronto, a legendary serve reduced to a liability, and a 21-year-old with ruffled socks and light-up shoes proving that the fastest weapon in the sport means absolutely nothing against someone who has already decided she refuses to lose again.